In the 19th century, an event occurred that was never recorded in history, a story concealed in plain sight, a tale no one wishes to be told. Imagine awakening in a world overflowing with orphans. Vast cities built, then suddenly emptied. Amusement parks displaying infants inside incubators as though they were part of a spectacle. Hundreds of thousands of children without fathers or mothers, transported across continents to cities erected upon the ruins of a civilization deliberately erased. Where did all these children come from? And why were cities abruptly abandoned, only to be repopulated decades later with life? Were orphanages truly humanitarian projects, or merely a facade for a global plan aimed at resettling humanity? Was it simple compassion for destitute children, or a reconstruction effort for a civilization whose traces have been obliterated under the banner of virtue and charity, during which thousands of young children were moved like pieces in a global game orchestrated behind the scenes? Who organized these transcontinental networks? Who possessed the power necessary to erase entire generations from collective memory? What truly happened in the 19th century? It is a story that conceals something far deeper and darker than a mere social tragedy, a clear indication of a grand conspiracy to reshape the world in the past, and perhaps again in the near future. In the 19th century, children born outside of marriage were deemed illegitimate, stripped of any legally recognized status. This constituted a severe social stigma that led most employers to refuse to hire women who had borne an illegitimate child. As a result, many unmarried mothers who gave birth outside wedlock found themselves homeless, ill, and starving, with no option but to seek refuge in workhouses, where they were forced to perform the harshest and most degrading labor. In certain regions, women who bore illegitimate children were compelled to wear distinctive clothing that publicly marked them as unmarried mothers or as fallen women. Consequently, many were driven, willingly or unwillingly, to relinquish their children. As a result, an enormous number of orphanages and foundling institutions were established to absorb these children, who were torn from their mother's arms in the name of virtue and social order. One such example is the Foundling Hospital in London, which was exceptionally active during the 19th century. It is said that Charles Dickens was deeply fascinated by this institution and drew inspiration from it for several of his works. Observe its immense scale. The official narrative tells us that approximately 4,500 women surrendered their children to this vast building, which was merely one institution among dozens of others. According to Wikipedia, there exists a partial list of more than 64 orphanages founded in the United Kingdom during the 19th century. And of course, the list does not encompass everything. The phenomenon of abandoned or orphaned children in the 19th century is well documented by numerous researchers, and most agree that it is nearly impossible to determine precise figures that fairly represent the extent of this phenomenon during that era. The traces of these children were not preserved in official records. They were swallowed by the mud and ultimately swept away by oblivion. It is also worth noting that this phenomenon was not confined to Britain alone, but was global in scope. In the city of New York alone, there were 4 institutions dedicated to housing foundlings, handling thousands of children annually. By the 20th century, Italy was reporting approximately 32,000 such children each year. Records indicate that approximately 374,000 infants were placed in shelters in Milan, Naples, and Florence, while Spain and Portugal were registering around 15,000 foundlings annually before the year 1860. The historian David L. Ransell notes that by the 1880s, Moscow was receiving between 16,000 and 18,000 infants each year, sending more than 10,000 of them annually to surrounding villages to receive care. In the year 1882, a total of 41,720 foundling children were living with 32,000 foster families, distributed across 4,418 Russian villages, some of which house more than 90 children each. Yet within this context, a crucial matter is often overlooked. In that dark chapter of the 19th century, there existed a hidden dimension of cruelty no less severe than what unfolded in the streets and orphanages. A series of laws was enacted that irrevocably altered the fate of thousands of women and children. Under the pretext of reforming the Poor Law of 1833, provisions known as the bastardy clauses were introduced, transferring full responsibility for the illegitimate child solely to the mother. She alone was rendered legally accountable, while the father was entirely absolved of any financial or social obligation. Thus, these laws amounted to a form of social death sentence for women branded with disgrace, no employment available to them, no shelter willing to receive them, and no mercy awaiting them from society. Gradually, thousands of mothers found themselves confronted with only two choices: submission to humiliation in the brutal workhouses, or the surrender of their children to authorities that promised care. On the surface, the law appeared to be a social reform. In reality, it functioned as an effective mechanism for severing children from their mothers and feeding a vast network of shelters and adoption institutions that soon evolved into gateways for human trafficking. Thus emerged a generation without lineage, without roots, and without the right to ask about its own identity. A generation deliberately engineered to become a building block in a project larger than them all. During that era, advertisements for adoption or childcare were commonplace in newspapers. However, many researchers have pointed out that these notices often serve as a cover for what were known as baby farms, a term used at the time to describe the trade in children. The transaction between the mother and the farm typically took place in a public space, on public transport, or through a third party, without the exchange of any personal information. The infant was simply taken without questions, and money was paid to the mother, who knew deep within herself that she would never see her child again. Most of these children were given new identities, provided temporarily with shelter, food, and clothing, and then sent to workhouses or to other destinations around the world. The final continent to witness a massive wave of orphan migration was the United States of America, where old photographs offer clear evidence of what came to be known as the orphan trains. The first group of these children arrived in the state of Michigan in 1854, and from that moment onward a vast transfer operation began, with hundreds of thousands of children transported across states through 97 institutions, continuing until the year 1929. Nor was this phenomenon confined to America alone. A woman named Annie McPherson transported more than 100,000 foundling children from the United Kingdom to Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, and Australia, where they were sold as laborers. The question that inevitably arises is this: why do we see, in historical photographs, such vast numbers of children working in factories on machines originally designed for adults? Was there truly an insufficient number of adults at that time to perform the required labor? Yet, despite the strangeness of all this, it pales in comparison to what became known as incubator exhibitions. In the United States of America at the dawn of the 20th century, many amusement parks featured unusual displays referred to as innovation exhibitions. Visitors could stroll by holding ice cream, passing stations that were, in reality, neonatal intensive care units equipped with incubators containing premature infants, children born before completing their natural development. This idea was devised by the German Martin County, a man whom the official narrative transformed into a humanitarian hero. He is said to have realized early on that this innovation would save the lives of infants. Since the technology required to keep premature newborns alive was prohibitively expensive, County conceived the notion that the public would pay to see them inside incubators. Thus, he charged admission fees at amusement parks in order to secure the funding necessary to keep these infants alive. The number of premature babies treated in these incubators, scattered throughout amusement parks, reportedly reached nearly 80,000. Nurses tended to the infants while astonished crowds observed them as though they were watching a form of entertainment. The exhibitions even included advertisements and promoters shouting to lure people into seeing the babies inside the incubators. But why were people paying money to look at living infants, as if they had never seen a baby before? Did they not, in that era, have children of their own? Where were the fathers and mothers of these infants? And how did they possess, in the 19th century, such advanced technology capable of keeping premature babies alive? If the existence of hundreds of thousands of orphans in the 19th century already strains belief, what then of 80,000 children born before their time? Were they truly born naturally, or is there a flaw in the official narrative that demands suspicion? Were women of that era truly so careless as to result in such an enormous number of premature births? And did the United States even possess the population density necessary to justify the existence of 80,000 premature infants? We are not speaking here of orphans, but of babies born too soon. For this reason, the official account is unconvincing and defies logical imagination. So where did these children come from? What is truly troubling is Martin County's background. Many historians have pointed out that he held no academic degree in medicine and received no formal medical training whatsoever. As such, his story resembles the unconvincing tales of benevolence we hear today about certain contemporary figures engaged in so-called charitable work. So were these exhibitions a cover for illicit adoption operations involving premature infants? And even if they were premature, did that not mean they had fathers and mothers? Who owned these amusement parks? Who financed their construction? Who was responsible for the children within them? And what became of those children once they grew up and left the incubators? Moreover, where did these incubators come from, equipped with technologies far beyond what their era should have allowed? And why did the traces of thousands of infants vanish after these exhibitions came to an end? In reality, this was not merely an innocent medical experiment or a harmless form of entertainment, but an intricate network of money, politics, and ideology. If the entire story provokes a deep sense of unease, it is because we have not been told the full truth. Why were there hundreds of thousands of children without parents in the 19th century? Where did they come from? And why were they transported across the world to Europe, America, Russia, Australia, and Canada? And if childbirth outside of marriage constituted such a severe social stigma and caused such profound suffering, why did so many people place themselves in that situation to begin with? Did governments truly care about social morality to the extent that they enacted laws, built orphanages, and established vast networks for relocating children? Did this not impose an enormous financial and administrative burden upon them? Yet the truth is that behind this fabricated narrative of orphans and premature infants lay a global agenda whose true aim was the resettlement of populations. Returning to the images of 19th century cities, we are confronted with the fundamental question: why do they appear entirely devoid of human presence? The common explanation claims that early photographic techniques required long exposure times, causing moving objects, such as people and carriages, to vanish from the frame. Yet this justification collapses in the face of the vast number of images depicting immense cities, with their grand buildings and paved streets, utterly absent of any sign of human life. No figures in the roads, no silhouettes in the windows, not even activity in the markets. This is because they were not inhabited at the moment they were photographed. They had been emptied, and an entire generation had been eliminated as part of a population reset, after which the land was repopulated with orphans and displaced people to construct a new society in service of a different system. According to the available evidence, this population reset was not a sudden occurrence, but a carefully orchestrated, long-term process carried out in precise and interconnected stages, involving governments alongside religious, medical, and military institutions. The first phase began with a reduction of indigenous populations through successive wars, epidemics that erupted simultaneously across multiple countries at specific moments, and the deployment of unknown technologies to manufacture natural disasters, until a great demographic collapse occurred, emptying entire cities of their inhabitants. This bears a striking resemblance to what contemporary conspiracy literature refers to as the theory of the Golden Billion. The second phase followed. Orphans and refugees were gathered into vast institutions that functioned as centers of sorting and reconditioning, designed to produce a generation of people with a different consciousness, submissive to the new order. After that, hundreds of thousands of children were transported across continents through what later became known as the orphan trains and so-called humanitarian settlement programs, to be redistributed into empty cities. In the background, the emerging media of the time, along with churches and charitable organizations, polished the image and marketed the official narrative, a story that would be accepted and preserved for centuries to come. In this way, humanity's collective memory was reset, and people awakened in a new century unaware of where they had come from or to whom they truly belonged. The people we see in photographs from that era were not the ones who built those magnificent structures. They merely inherited them, then unknowingly participated in repurposing them to serve the grand deception that concealed the great population collapse. I know that what I am saying may not seem logical at this moment. You may be asking, why were those cities covered in mud? What happened that forced governments to resort to population resets? I also know you are wondering, what does all this have to do with the flat Earth theory? Do not worry. Everything will become more interconnected and clearer as we continue this journey. We have heard so far was merely a prelude, a key meant to awaken the mind from its slumber, the first necessary threads pointing to a flaw that, even if you cannot yet see it, I'm certain you can feel. Empty cities, buried architecture, and orphans who filled the world are not separate chapters of history, but converging signs warning of an approaching storm from which there is no escape. A vast black cloud is moving toward us, and I will not hide the truth from you. We are heading straight into its heart. And for the second time, everything we have discussed thus far has been nothing more than preparation. The true story has not yet begun. The stage had to be set first, and now it stands ready. It is time for me to keep my promise and take you back to the future.